Okay, this is spent with a bunch of companies, but of course the new figures, notice, still underestimate Qatar's total spending because they come in addition to the more than a dozen groups contracted by Qatar before 2021. So this is a very, very wealthy nation of 2.8 million people that is spending a ton of money to gain influence. Let's have a look. The new documentary highlights Qatar's role in sponsoring global Muslim Brotherhood education institutions in Europe. Now, under President Trump, things got a little difficult for these guys, so they went to Europe. They started sponsoring, they started moving into universities. They're putting money into think tanks, into universities, like I said, think tanks, counter-terror training, and those counter-terror groups and those think tanks are producing idiots. Now, okay, now the rift, now they want to claim that, of course, the Saudis nasty, but of course these guys are collaborating with the Muslim Brotherhood, they're collaborating with Iran, right? Qatar's growing lobby efforts. Los Angeles businessman imprisoned for influence scheme claims decades of CIA relationship. Sorry about that. Let me just go back. Okay. So last month, Global Influence Operations reported on the imprisonment of this man, an LA businessman, in connection with a massive political influence scheme. This included unregistered lobbying. So Bente J said, it is clear our government already sold us to these Islamists. Well, you should see some of the articles I'm going to bring up later, which says, has Qatar bought Washington, for instance? Your thoughts, Thunderous?
No, the first thing I was thinking of, just going back to your comments about their infiltration, it kind of reminds me of the 70s and 80s when the Arab money, before they started doing this sophisticated way of influence, they were actually taking scientists over to Saudi Arabia or India, and that is non-Muslim scientists, and trying to have the non-Muslim scientists, by flattering them, taking them to hotels, having them stay in expensive resorts and such, and then almost giving them a script to read.
Correct.
To try and say that there was an Islamic scientific corroboration between the Quran and science, having them read a script in support. But obviously, since those days of the 70s and 80s, the Islamic influence has become a lot more sophisticated now, and is doing it by stealth in this manner, rather than overtly by using the sciences. And there's a comment in the chat as well by Benta J. We need a muscular Christianity, if not, so we should be overrun by these Muslims. Can I just say, Benta J, if you just read Matthew 6:33 and then Daniel 2:44, that is the only way. Daniel 2:44, the God of the Bible speaks for itself.
Right. On the question of XYZ and the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam has a propaganda arm. They call it a research arm, and they put out books. For instance, one of the books they put out is the relationship of the Jews and their mistreatment, slavery, and ill-treatment of blacks. It is generally a pile of trash, written by, well, they don't tell you who wrote it. It just says the Nation of Islam wrote it. So you don't know who the authors are. And however, it tries to foment a distrust, obviously to create social tension. So these guys are working very hard to foment social tension and disruption. Yes?
Can I just comment on that? Well, anybody who you can easily see that in the Bible is false. Just look at the Ethiopian eunuch who went to Jerusalem to worship and then was on his way back to Ethiopia. So anybody who thinks that there's a distrust between Judaism or Jews and black people, the Bible clearly shows that to be false.
Right. Nathaniel says, don't forget that the Emir of Qatar owns Al Jazeera, probably the most influential news network in the world, considered the main cause of the Arab Spring. So some fair examples. Okay. And Sunny Sleep says, suddenly Dawa boys appear outside the clubs. Now, to continue with this, because it's fairly lengthy, so I'm going to go through at a relatively fast pace. The role of Arab oil money is ignored. It is older than the Israeli lobby. It started with the Arab National League of America in the 1930s. I've mentioned this, how the CIA obliged King Saud of Saudi Arabia, who wanted to compete with the Israeli lobby. The Arab lobby is a group of 21 Islamic states plus Palestine, or Fakistan as I tend to call it. It is Saudi-led and dominated. It is represented in the US by oil interests, defense contractors, and corporations with commercial interests in Saudi Arabia and the 21 markets that we've mentioned here. Now the Pentagon. Weapon sales protect US interests, of course, against Iran and the former Soviet threat, but of course weapon sales also produce income for these groups. Now the Pentagon, to lower unit costs and extend production life, they need to sell outside of just the US and Europe. And this has been very, very profitable, very lucrative for the arms industry. I worked within that industry for a long time in the Middle East. So yes, it is. I'm not complaining. It paid me very well back then. So now let's have a look at Palestine. Let's talk about the Palestinian question. Are these people lobbying on behalf of the Palestinians, or are they lobbying against Israel? Remember, they said that the Palestinian issue is Islamic. It is not humanitarian.